She slapped the woman in 14C for being entitled. She didn't know that woman owned the airline, and had once lived in a homeless shelter. It happened fast, almost like a reflex. 1 second, the black woman was asking about the delay in service, and the next, the flight attendant leaned in, condescending smile tightening, voice clipped, posture sharp. The interaction wasn't loud, but it was tense. It drew side glances. Whispers floated across first class. The black woman, dressed in simple jeans and a navy cardigan, calmly repeated her request for a bottle of water and clarification on the turbulence delay. The flight attendant, frazzled and flustered by a difficult passenger earlier, snapped. She said, "Ma'am, I don't know what you're used to, but we don't take demands like that." When the woman corrected her, politely but firmly, the attendant made the fatal mistake of saying, "People like you always think the world owes them something." Gasps came before the slap. The black woman remained calm, but she was firm. "Excuse me." And then came the open-handed blow, light but sharp, the kind that echoed more in meaning than sound. Phones were already recording. Someone yelled. Another flight attendant rushed over. Security was called. The plane hadn't even left the gate. No one knew her name yet. Just the woman in 14C. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't hit back. She sat there, stunned but composed, as airport security escorted her off to verify the incident. The flight attendant, meanwhile, stood shaking, eyes wide with shock, perhaps more at what she'd done than at who she had done it to. The video went viral before the plane even left the tarmac. A 20-second clip of the slap, paired with an equally short clip of the black woman stepping off the plane, head held high. Within hours, Twitter exploded with hashtags. Hashtag slapped for flying, hashtag CON14C, hashtag flying while black. That's when her name came out. Madison Cole, Harvard graduate, former aerospace engineer, founder and CEO of Cole Air, the airline they were flying on. The woman who was assaulted owned the very company whose employee had humiliated her in front of a cabin full of witnesses. By the time the flight attendant landed, on another flight she was placed on after being removed from the original, her face was already everywhere. Blurred out in some places, but clearly identifiable in others. Comments piled up. Screenshots of her Facebook page. Old photos. Accusations. Memes. News headlines screamed about corporate royalty assaulted in her own airline. Late-night comedians joked about the slap that grounded a career. Her name was Sherry Donovan, 28. Worked the skies for nearly 7 years. No major incidents until now. No criminal record. A few disciplinary write-ups, minor at best. Lateness, friction with a senior steward once, nothing that would raise a flag. She was known for being professional, efficient, polished, maybe a little cold. She didn't go home that night. She couldn't. Paparazzi camped outside her building. Friends weren't picking up her calls. Her manager left a voicemail. "We're suspending you pending investigation. Don't speak to the media. Legal will contact you." It wasn't until midnight that she learned Madison Cole had declined to press charges. Yet, that part was left open. But the world had already judged her. And loudly. Cole Air's official social media pages were bombarded. How can a company that prides itself on equality employ someone like that? "We demand her termination. If she's not gone in 24 hours, I'm flying elsewhere." The next day, a press release. Cole Air does not tolerate any form of discrimination, violence, or customer mistreatment. The employee in question has been placed on indefinite suspension as we conduct a full internal review. The wording was tight, careful. Madison Cole's name was not mentioned. But the subtext screamed louder than the actual announcement. She didn't need to speak. The public did it for her. Sherry turned off her phone and closed the blinds. She hadn't even processed what she had done. It wasn't about race, she told herself. It was about attitude. It was about tone. It was about being tired, being overwhelmed, being pushed too far. But she knew, deep down, that wasn't entirely true. The moment kept replaying in her head. The way the woman looked at her, not with aggression, but disappointment. The way her voice never rose. The dignity in her silence. The disbelief that someone could treat her that way on a flight she literally owned. Sherry cried. She didn't cry often. But she did that night. The internet did not. It roared with fury. How dare she? She hit the CEO of the company she works for. Entitlement? The only entitled one here was the person swinging. Some defended her. We all make mistakes. It was just a slap. But those voices were drowned out quickly. Even her union was hesitant to intervene. She got a terse message from her representative. Due to the unique nature of this incident, we're advising full cooperation with internal legal. We are reviewing possible support options. She was alone. Meanwhile, Madison Cole went about her day. She posted a message. I am safe. I believe in accountability and growth. Let's use this moment to reflect, not retaliate. The post was shared over 1 million times in 24 hours. Sherry's mother called the next morning. She had seen the video. Her voice trembled. Baby, what did you do? Sherry tried to explain, but there were no real words that could justify it. Her mother didn't yell, didn't scold. She just said, I taught you better than to see someone's worth by what they wear, didn't I? Sherry hung up and stared at the ceiling. She hadn't just slapped her boss. She had slapped a mirror. And now, the world was watching to see what she would do next. The termination letter came via email. No ceremony. No calls. Just a sterile, digitally signed PDF that began with, We regret to inform you, and ended with, effective immediately. Sherry stared at it for a full 5 minutes before even blinking. She had expected suspension, maybe some extended PR leave, but termination? It felt final, brutal. Deserved? Maybe. But the speed of it stunned her. Within minutes of the news, media headlines followed. Flight attendant who slapped airline CEO fired. The press painted it as swift justice. Social media celebrated. Colaire's stock even bumped slightly in response to the statement. Public trust restored. Everyone moved on except Sherry. The apartment felt smaller. She hadn't opened the blinds in days. The light felt too judgmental. Her friends ghosted her. Her ex-boyfriend sent a single message. Damn. Didn't think you had that in you. She deleted it without replying. She tried to justify it to herself mostly. The woman had pushed her buttons. The tone. The entitlement. But that was just noise. The deeper truth stung more. She had acted on an assumption. She had seen a black woman in Coach-style clothes, no designer bag, no flashy jewelry, asking assertive questions, and she had filled in the blanks. Wrongly. Disastrously. Then came the envelope. Hand-delivered. No name, no sender. Just her address, typed neatly. Inside, a court summons. Not criminal charges, but a civil suit filed under Colaire's Restorative Justice Program, a newer legal initiative Madison Cole had helped pioneer, an alternative to traditional litigation. Instead of fines or jail time, the offender and the victim engage in structured, supervised dialogue aimed at reconciliation and transformation. It was controversial. Some said it was too soft. Others called it revolutionary. Sherry had never heard of it. Attached to the papers was a handwritten note. Neat cursive, unassuming tone. You hurt me in public. I want to confront that pain in a way that heals, not destroys. You don't owe me your pride. You owe me your truth. Madison. No threats. No venom. Just a firm, measured invitation to face what she had done. Not just the act, but the mentality behind it. Sherry almost threw it away. Almost. The first meeting wasn't easy. A neutral room. A mediator. No cameras. No lawyers. Just the two of them and a structured conversation protocol. Sherry entered tense, arms folded, prepared to defend herself. But Madison didn't attack. She didn't condescend. She didn't gloat. She simply asked, Why did you assume I wasn't worth respect? Sherry flinched. I didn't, she began, then stopped. The lie tasted bitter. I don't know, she admitted finally. You didn't look like what I thought a CEO would look like. I thought you were just being difficult. Madison nodded. And what do you think difficult looks like? The room sat in silence for a long time. I guess, someone like me, Sherry said, almost a whisper. Madison didn't react. No raised eyebrows. No judgment. Just quiet acknowledgement. You know, Madison said, I used to scrub toilets at bus stations. Slept in one for a week after my mother died. I've been looked down on more times than I can count. But even I didn't expect it from someone who also probably fought her way up. Sherry's throat clenched. Her mouth dried. I didn't mean to. But you did, Madison said gently. The harm is real. Even if the intent wasn't. That sentence cracked something in Sherry. The distinction between impact and intent. No one had ever framed it like that before. Her career had always revolved around efficiency, compliance, optics, not introspection. The next few sessions went deeper. The program didn't just involve dialogue. It came with educational modules, bias recognition training, emotional regulation, systemic racism seminars. There were journal entries, reflection prompts, audio stories from people across the country who had faced similar microaggressions or worse. Some voices angry, some resigned, others still struggling. At first, Sherry resisted. It felt performative, like corporate HR fluff. But somewhere between a podcast about redlining and a letter from a high schooler suspended for talking back, something shifted. The stories weren't abstract. They weren't distant. They sounded like her neighbors, her classmates, even her childhood self, once bullied for her accent after moving from rural Kentucky. The hardest moment came when she had to read a letter aloud to Madison, one in which she detailed the assumptions she had made in those 10 fateful seconds. I assumed you were demanding because you were direct. I assumed you were lesser because you didn't have a Chanel bag. I assumed you were a problem because you didn't defer. And I slapped you because I couldn't handle the mirror. Madison said nothing for a long time. Then, I appreciate your honesty. Now, what are you going to do with it? That question didn't come with a guidebook. The program ended after 6 weeks. Sherry expected silence, a pat on the head, a good effort. Instead, she received another envelope. Another invitation. This time, not to a courtroom, but to an internal program Madison had started, Project Elevate, a paid training and mentorship initiative designed to retrain aviation workers who had been involved in bias-related incidents. Not just a second chance, but a responsibility. A pathway toward advocacy, not shame. You have a voice, the letter said. You made a mistake. That doesn't define you. What you do next will. Sherry cried again. Not from guilt this time, but from the unfamiliar weight of being seen, not just judged. She accepted. The media didn't cover her return. There were no headlines this time. No hashtags. Just a quiet reintegration. The first time she walked into the training center, she passed a wall of portraits, graduates of the program. All of them had made mistakes. All of them had rebuilt from the rubble. Madison was there that day. She didn't speak much. Just nodded when they locked eyes. The past didn't vanish, but it transformed. Sherry knew she would never return to the skies, not as a flight attendant anyway. But maybe she could build runways for others. Safer ones. Kinder ones. She wasn't forgiven overnight. But she had begun. By the time Sherry entered her first day of Project Elevate, the shame had dulled, but the guilt hadn't vanished. There were 12 others in the cohort, former employees from different industries, different backgrounds, but with one common thread. They had all let prejudice, assumptions, or unexamined bias steer a moment that ruined careers. None of them looked like villains. That was the most sobering realization. Just people. Flawed, tired, defensive, humbled. The first assignment was deceptively simple. Tell your story without defending it. Sherry's voice cracked on the second sentence. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't play the victim. I hit someone because I thought I could. That's it. The room was silent. No applause. No sympathy. Just acceptance. Others followed, some with tears, some with raw regret, some still clinging to justifications. But by the end of the day, she realized something profound. The program wasn't about punishment. It was about rebuilding integrity. Instructors were tough but fair. Lectures were real. None of that sanitized corporate stuff. They talked about implicit bias, systemic inequities, how language becomes weaponized, how culture molds perception. It wasn't political. It was personal. They didn't just quote stats. They brought in survivors. People who'd lost jobs, been wrongly arrested, humiliated in classrooms or hospitals. People who never got a second chance. Sherry listened more than she spoke. She filled pages in her journal with questions she didn't yet have answers to. One module focused entirely on legacy, what you leave behind, even in moments you forget. A former teacher spoke about how a sarcastic comment about a student's name led to years of self-doubt for that kid. One moment, one assumption, and you become someone's permanent scar, she said. That line haunted Sherry. Who had she scarred? Who had she dismissed before Madison? What version of herself had she nurtured without realizing it? Midway through the program, each trainee had to mentor someone newly entering the cohort. Sherry didn't feel qualified, but the staff insisted. Growth isn't complete until it serves someone else, they said. Her mentee was a man named Darren, former retail supervisor, terminated after falsely accusing a young black customer of shoplifting. Darren was angry, at himself, at the system, at how fast it had all fallen apart. I'm not a racist, he kept saying. Sherry didn't argue. She just asked him why he felt the need to say that so often. Silence. Then, eventually, a shift. Darren stopped talking about intentions and started analyzing outcomes. By week 3, he was journaling. By week 5, he stopped avoiding the phrase, I caused harm. That moment mattered. For Sherry, mentoring him brought new clarity. This wasn't about making amends with one CEO. It was about unlearning years of internalized narrative. Bias wasn't always hatred. Sometimes it was fear wrapped in politeness. Sometimes it was silence when someone needed your voice. And sometimes it was a slap in public because someone challenged your unearned authority. She realized her real work wasn't to fix one incident, it was to prevent the next. One day, unexpectedly, Madison visited the cohort. No security detail. No staff announcement. Just walked in, sat at the back, and listened. At lunch, she quietly pulled Sherry aside. You're doing the work, she said. I see it. You could walk away when this ends. No one would blame you. But I hope you stay. Sherry didn't respond right away. She wasn't used to being asked to lead. She had always followed policy, followed orders. But something inside her had shifted. She wanted to be part of building policies, not just enforcing them. Leadership doesn't mean you're better, Madison said, sensing her hesitation. It means you take responsibility beyond yourself. The program ended with a presentation from each graduate. 10 minutes to speak about transformation, what they learned, and what they'd do next. Sherry's speech wasn't rehearsed. She didn't read off notes. She spoke like someone who had finally understood the difference between shame and accountability. I used to think I lost my job because of one mistake, she said. But that mistake was built on 1,000 smaller ones I never questioned. I didn't lose everything. I lost the version of myself that I never want to return to. And that's a gift. When it was over, Madison handed her a sealed folder. Inside, an offer letter. A new job. Not as a flight attendant. Not in operations. But in internal training and culture development. A role designed for people who had seen the worst of themselves and decided to do better. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't pay 6 figures. But it mattered. Her first assignment? To help design a new onboarding module for Colaire's in-flight staff. One focused on unconscious bias, empathy, and response under pressure. She didn't hesitate. On her first day in the new role, she arrived early, sat in the back of the training room, and watched new hires file in. Young, nervous, optimistic. She saw versions of her younger self in them. And she realized, legacy isn't what you build after a scandal. It's what you start doing the moment you stop hiding from the truth. When one trainee asked, "Why should we even care about all this bias stuff? We're here to serve people, not analyze them," Sherry didn't lecture. She said, calmly, "Because how you see someone determines how you treat them. And how you treat them can either protect or harm. We don't always know which moment changes someone's life. So we choose to make every moment safe." She didn't need applause. She just needed them to listen. The media didn't wait. The moment the story leaked, a flight attendant slapping a black CEO, not knowing she owned the airline, it ignited like dry brush. Headlines screamed disrespect, racism, privilege. The video went viral. Experts lined up on talk shows, dissecting body language and power dynamic. Sherry's name trended for all the wrong reasons. Strangers unearthed old social media posts, comments taken out of context, moments she barely remembered but now had to own. There was no hiding. Madison remained silent publicly. She refused interviews, rejected narrative spin. Her team advised her to issue a strong statement, demand accountability, frame it as a corporate values issue. But she didn't. She knew how these stories played out. Rage flared, people were shamed, apologies scripted, and then nothing changed. She wasn't interested in making Sherry a symbol of everything wrong. She was interested in fixing what allowed it to feel normal in the first place. Behind closed doors, Madison worked relentlessly. She ordered an audit of Colaire's internal culture, focusing on hiring practices, promotion trends, and implicit bias in service protocols. What she saw confirmed what she already suspected. Sherry's action wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom. Disrespect wore a uniform just as easily as kindness did. And while most staff didn't assault passengers, many participated in quieter forms of harm. Dismissing complaints from black travelers, mispronouncing names without effort to learn, enforcing policies unevenly. Meanwhile, Sherry's world crumbled. Friends distanced themselves. Her family was ashamed. She couldn't walk into a grocery store without catching someone whispering. Her job was gone, her pension uncertain, and every application she submitted got ghosted. She was living off savings, barely making rent, drowning in apology emails she drafted but never sent. She considered disappearing, changing her name, moving states. But shame followed her like shadow. It didn't respect zip codes. One afternoon, she received a letter. Not from Colaire, not from the press. From a former passenger. An older black woman who had flown with her years ago. "You helped me lift my bag without hesitation. I don't know if you remember." "I do." The note wasn't long. But it cracked open something inside her. Not everyone had condemned her. Not everyone had forgotten everything else. There were still choices to be made. Madison finally broke her silence. Not on television, not through PR, but at a university town hall event about corporate ethic. When asked about the incident, she didn't speak about outrage or betrayal. She spoke about patterns, about how unchecked assumptions reproduce themselves in uniforms, desks, titles. We've all inherited systems built to favor some and doubt others. If I'd reacted the way people expected, I'd have fired her, sued, and moved on. But I've lived on the other side of assumptions. Someone once looked at me and didn't see a CEO, they saw someone who didn't belong. I won't be that person to someone else. The story shifted. Public opinion didn't flip overnight, but the rage softened. Think pieces began to question how many sheriffs lived inside corporations. The internet moved on to newer scandals, but something else lingered, an undercurrent of curiosity about what change could look like beyond punishment. Colaire launched a campaign called Altitude with Empathy. Not a branding stunt, but a company-wide overhaul. New bias training wasn't a one-day slideshow, it was immersive, ongoing, mandatory. Anonymous surveys gave voice to employees across racial and economic backgrounds. Policy changes made inclusion measurable, not aspirational. Sherry, re-employed through Project Elevate, became a key voice behind this movement. She wasn't paraded as redemption fodder. She was a worker, part of the team, contributing, listening, evolving. Her insight became valuable because it came from failure, not theory. She helped design training scenarios that reflected real tension, not corporate fantasy. She didn't pretend to have all the answers, but she asked better questions than most. Madison met with her regularly. Not as boss to subordinate, but as peers navigating uncomfortable truths. In one meeting, she shared something she had never said publicly. She had once been denied a cabin crew position by Colair before she became its owner, told she lacked the right look. That phrase had haunted her through every acquisition, every boardroom win. "I bought the airline that rejected me," she said. Not for revenge. For reform. That revelation shifted something deeper between them. The slap that once symbolized division had become a strange bridge. Neither woman minimized what happened. It wasn't a feel-good story wrapped in bows. But they had both grown, individually and structurally, because someone chose to see beyond the surface. Years of internal resistance began crumbling. Senior managers who'd coasted on tenure but ignored equity metrics were replaced. New recruitment standards opened doors for underrepresented groups without reducing quality. And within 2 years, Colair won industry awards, not for profits but for cultural transformation. Other airlines studied their model. Some dismissed it as a fluke. Others followed. But numbers told the real story. Customer satisfaction improved across all demographics. Employee retention rose, especially among staff of color. Incident reports involving racial conflict dropped. And more importantly, people began to feel like they could breathe inside their roles, without code switching, without fear. Sherry remained quietly consistent. She didn't crave the spotlight. She wasn't a hero. But she had become something rarer. Someone who didn't run from the worst version of themselves. Someone who chose to turn a collapse into construction. Her journey resonated, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. And Madison? She continued leading with the same quiet fire. She mentored new executives with the principle that every title was borrowed from the people you serve. She expanded Project Elevate into a national initiative, available to any industry, any organization willing to face its own mirrors. They never became best friends. That wasn't the point. They remained bound by a moment no one could undo, but also by what they did after it. In that, they found not resolution, but purpose. The flight attendant who once slapped the CEO now stood beside her, not as a PR stunt, not as a token, but as evidence that transformation was possible. That redemption wasn't weakness. That growth wasn't optional. And that sometimes the deepest form of leadership is learning to rebuild the world you once helped break. Madison didn't expect the ripple effect to travel as far as it did. What began as a decision rooted in principle, choosing empathy over retribution, unlocked conversations across industries. HR departments in tech firms and hospitals reached out to study Colair's new model. School districts asked for consultation. Government agencies quietly inquired about duplicating Project Elevate. Madison hadn't aimed to become a reform figurehead, but when systems are starving for direction, clarity becomes contagious. She maintained her posture of humility. "We're not perfect," she told every interviewer. "We're committed." That distinction mattered. It allowed space for failure, for recalibration, for progress without the pressure of spectacle. Her leadership wasn't about optics. It was about recalibrating flight paths, so to speak. Not just planes but people. She had long accepted that legacy wasn't built on applause. It was built on impact. Sherry's role also deepened. Not because someone scripted it that way, but because she earned it. The former flight attendant became a core developer of the airline's new training curriculum. Her lived experience, the moment of crisis and what followed, became a case study in unconscious bias, accountability, and restoration. She delivered internal talks to new employees, not as a cautionary tale but as a mirror. Her message was always clear: bias isn't a character flaw. It's a condition we all inherit. But it's our responsibility to treat it. She faced resistance, naturally. Some colleagues still looked at her with quiet judgment. Others whispered about her past in break rooms. She didn't blame them. But she refused to let shame write her script. Her actions now were louder than their assumptions. In time, even her critics softened. When someone's consistent, it's hard to keep pretending they haven't changed. One of the strongest parts of Sherry's growth was her ability to extend mentorship to others who had once been like her: stubborn, defensive, afraid to admit bias. She began facilitating workshops that didn't just inform but transformed. She challenged participants to explore their upbringing, the coded language of their childhoods, the silent teachings of media and society. The goal wasn't guilt, it was clarity, understanding, and through understanding, the chance to unlearn. Meanwhile, Madison pushed forward with institutional restructuring. Pay equity audits became standard. Promotion metrics were rewritten to reward leadership through inclusion, not just performance. Internal grievance processes were overhauled to reduce retaliation fears. Managers underwent 360-degree reviews, rated anonymously by team members to detect toxic leadership. Change wasn't just top-down. It was lateral, vertical, diagonal, organic but intentional. Outside the airline, media interest never entirely faded. But when journalists returned, the story was no longer about scandal. It was about systemic innovation born from personal failure. Madison always redirected credit. This isn't about me. It's about what happens when people stop performing perfection and start practicing humility. The board, initially skeptical, became staunch supporters. Shareholders didn't revolt, they rallied. Financial reports showed something they hadn't anticipated: inclusion was good for business. Turnover rates dropped. Customer loyalty surged. Complaints about discrimination shrank. It turned out that when people felt seen, heard, and respected, everyone won. Madison took the success and funneled it back into the ecosystem. Project Elevate became a nonprofit arm, offering low-cost training to small businesses and nonprofits that couldn't afford corporate-level consulting. They hired facilitators from diverse backgrounds, paid equitably, and ensured every workshop came with follow-up accountability measures. They refused to become another diversity checkbox. The goal was cultural shift, not compliance. As for Sherry, her public image underwent its own transformation. She never asked to be forgiven in the spotlight. She just kept showing up, doing the work, telling the truth. Her presence at industry conferences, once awkward, became powerful. Her words landed differently because they were born in fire. She could speak about prejudice not just as a victim but as a former vessel. That made her rare. That made her necessary. The defining moment came 2 years later, when Colair hosted its first Global Inclusion Summit. The keynote speaker was announced with little fanfare. Madison introduced her personally, not with titles or accomplishments, but with a simple statement: growth is not linear, and redemption is not weakness. Today's speaker taught us that through her life. Sherry walked onto the stage without fear. The audience, a sea of executives, educators, civil servants, and students, stood in silence. She began with the story everyone knew, then shifted to the parts they didn't. The guilt, the reflection, the desire to run, the decision to stay, and what it took to rebuild her sense of self without excuses. "There's no version of this where I'm the hero," she said. "I hurt someone because I made assumptions about her place. What I didn't know was that she was building a place for people like me. And instead of kicking me out of it, she pulled up a chair. Tears weren't uncommon by the end of her speech. But more importantly, minds shifted. People saw what accountability could look like without humiliation, what leadership looked like without ego, what justice looked like with restoration instead of revenge. The summit's success led to policy discussions on Capitol Hill. Madison was invited to share best practices with a bipartisan panel on workplace equity. She was asked how she turned a moment of conflict into a movement of growth. Her answer was consistent: you don't build empathy by punishing ignorance. You build it by creating environments where people are allowed to confront what they've been taught and choose differently. Sherry didn't accompany her on that trip. She was in Atlanta onboarding a new batch of cabin crew members. During the training, one recruit, young, nervous, and unsure, asked her, "How did you even get into this work?" Sherry smiled. "Bad decision. Then a better one. Then another. That's how most of us get anywhere worth going." The story didn't end in one grand gesture. It evolved in hundreds of small, intentional steps. Not everyone changed. Not everyone wanted to. But enough people did. And that was enough to start something bigger than either woman imagined. What started as a slap turned into a spark. And from that spark, a movement took flight. Not one of perfection, but of people committed to doing better together. Madison understood the power of vulnerability, not just as a leader, but as a human. When she spoke about her own history, her homelessness, the nights she spent wondering if the world had forgotten her, it wasn't for sympathy. It was to break down walls, to invite others into a space where real change could begin. She knew that transformation required honesty, the kind that unsettled comfort zones and questioned deeply ingrained belief. She made it a priority to share her story in internal newsletters, video messages, and leadership forums. "I was the person everyone overlooked," she said simply. "But no one is beyond the reach of hope or the possibility of change." This transparency helped shift company culture from transactional to relational. Employees weren't just workers. They were people with histories, struggles, and potential. The airline began investing heavily in mental health resources, recognizing that resilience isn't built in isolation. They launched confidential counseling, peer support groups, and stress management workshops. For the first time, employees were encouraged to speak up about burnout, microaggressions, and the subtle ways bias permeated their day-to-day lives. Leadership meetings no longer skirted these topics. They were center stage. The restorative justice program expanded beyond Sherry and the original flight attendant, inviting teams across departments to engage in facilitated dialogues. These sessions demanded raw courage. Participants confronted moments when they'd made assumptions, dismissed voices, or perpetuated exclusion, often without realizing it. The process was uncomfortable but necessary. It cultivated empathy by making the invisible visible. Madison saw the impact firsthand when new recruits told her they joined Colair because of its commitment to doing things differently. They wanted to be part of a company where their identity mattered, not just their job description. This kind of diversity wasn't tokenism, it was intentional, structural. Hiring panels included representation from underrepresented groups. Promotions factored in cultural competency. Benefits were tailored to address the needs of a wide variety of backgrounds. She also initiated mentorship circles pairing senior leaders with frontline staff, crossing traditional hierarchies. Sherry took a central role here, mentoring young employees who struggled with confidence or felt marginalized. She shared not only professional advice but personal lessons about confronting bias without losing yourself. Her journey became a beacon for many who feared their past would define their future. The external world took notice too. Local universities sought partnerships for internship programs that emphasized cultural humility and leadership development. Industry conferences invited Madison and Sherry to share their model, sparking a national conversation about how corporations could tackle systemic racism through proactive strategies rather than reactive damage control. Madison's leadership style, forged in hardship, emphasized listening over lecturing. She made it clear that mistakes were inevitable, but refusing to learn from them was not an option. She held her executive team accountable to these standards with regular evaluations and transparent reporting on progress. The shift wasn't painless. Old habits died hard, and some resisted fiercely. But inertia gave way to momentum. A critical moment came when the airline revised its customer service protocols to include bias interruption technique. Flight attendants were trained to recognize their own prejudices and to intervene when passengers exhibited discriminatory behavior. The goal was to create a safe, inclusive environment for both employees and travelers. When questioned about this, Madison was unequivocal. Our responsibility is to every person on board, regardless of who they are or where they come from. This approach created challenges, complaints from some customers, pushback from staff uncomfortable with added emotional labor. Madison didn't shy away from these tensions. She framed them as necessary growing pains. Inclusion was not a privilege for the comfortable, it was a commitment that required courage from everyone. Sherry often reflected on how far she'd come. The woman who once lashed out in anger now stood as a testament to resilience and growth. She had confronted her own biases and fears and emerged with a renewed sense of purpose. Her story was no longer about shame but about strength. She could face her reflection without flinching. Together, Madison and Sherry championed the message that true equality wasn't about erasing difference but embracing it. They encouraged conversations about race, class, and identity not as divisive topics but as essential elements of human experience. Their leadership was rooted in empathy because they knew that without it, policy meant little. The ripple effects extended into their personal lives as well. Madison found herself advocating for equitable practices in her community, volunteering with shelters and job training programs. Sherry became involved in local initiatives supporting women re-entering the workforce after hardship. They understood that change at the organizational level had to connect with broader societal transformation. They never romanticized the journey. Both acknowledged the pain, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But they refused to let those moments define the narrative. Instead, they focused on the work ahead, building systems that honored dignity, promoted growth, and fostered genuine inclusion. Their partnership, forged from an unlikely and painful confrontation, became a model for leadership that transcended traditional boundaries. It demonstrated that healing and progress often start with uncomfortable truths and the willingness to face them head-on. Ultimately, their story underscored a vital lesson. Leadership is not about power or position. It is about responsibility. The responsibility to listen, to learn, and to lead with integrity. And when leaders embrace that responsibility, they can inspire transformation not only within their organizations but in the world beyond. The decision to drop the charges against Sherry stunned the public, shaking assumptions about justice and accountability. Madison's choice was neither an act of weakness nor ignorance. It was a deliberate step toward something far more profound than punishment. The courtroom's quiet buzz faded into something new, restorative justice in action, a process demanding both honesty and courage from two women from very different worlds. This was not about blame. It was about confronting truth. In the weeks that followed, Sherry found herself attending sessions with Madison, facilitated by trained mediators skilled in guiding difficult conversations. The atmosphere was charged but controlled, a crucible where both women were forced to face the raw edges of their experiences and biases. Sherry had to admit her assumptions about Madison's background, the stereotypes she had internalized. Madison, in turn, shared moments of vulnerability, how her homelessness had shaped her leadership style and her commitment to empathy. Neither narrative was easy to tell, and neither was easy to hear. What emerged was a deeper understanding of how systemic racism and class prejudice operated invisibly in their lives. Sherry saw how her actions, fueled by fear and anger, had roots in years of feeling powerless and marginalized. Madison revealed how, despite her success, she grappled with constant doubts and the pressure to prove herself in spaces that were not designed for someone like her. Both women recognized the unspoken societal scripts they had followed, scripts that pitted them against each other instead of encouraging solidarity. This restorative justice approach challenged traditional notions of retribution. Instead of focusing on punishment, it emphasized healing and mutual growth. Sherry's willingness to engage honestly earned her a new kind of respect, not only from Madison but from airline staff and the wider community. The sessions became a platform to educate others about implicit bias and the impact of prejudice on everyday interactions. What began as a confrontation turned into a movement within the company, a commitment to acknowledge faults and work toward inclusivity. As the months passed, Sherry underwent a personal transformation. She took part in the company's bias training, absorbing lessons about empathy and cultural humility. Her colleagues, many initially skeptical, saw genuine change in her demeanor and attitude. She became an advocate, sharing her story openly, encouraging others to reflect on their own prejudices. The airline's management supported her journey, highlighting it as an example of redemption and growth. Madison's leadership was critical in sustaining this momentum. She used her platform to push for systemic reforms beyond the training programs. Hiring practices were re-evaluated to ensure diversity at all levels. Policies were introduced to address microaggressions and to protect employees from discrimination. The airline invested in community outreach programs focused on education and empowerment for marginalized groups. These efforts reinforce the idea that equality is not a static goal but an ongoing process requiring vigilance and dedication. The story of the slap and its aftermath became a catalyst for a broader cultural shift inside and outside the company. Media coverage initially framed it as a scandal, but as the restorative justice process unfolded, narratives shifted toward themes of forgiveness, accountability, and second chances. Interviews with Madison and Sherry highlighted their shared commitment to change and the importance of confronting uncomfortable truth. This journey also deepened Madison and Sherry's personal connection. What started as a confrontation evolved into mentorship and friendship. Madison saw in Sherry the resilience that had once carried her through the hardest moments of her life. She encouraged Sherry to embrace her potential and helped her navigate opportunities for advancement within the airline. Sherry, in turn, brought a grounded perspective that reminded Madison of the human realities behind corporate decisions. Their story inspired employees across departments to engage in open dialogue about race, class, and power dynamics. The airline hosted forums where staff could share experiences and propose solutions, fostering a culture of inclusion and respect. Leadership teams began incorporating these discussions into their strategic planning, ensuring that diversity and equity were woven into the company's DNA. Challenges remained, of course. Resistance from some quarters persisted, and progress was uneven. But the airline's commitment was unwavering. It recognized that true change required persistence, humility, and the courage to confront uncomfortable realities continuously. This awareness informed new initiatives aimed at addressing systemic barriers and promoting equal opportunity. The legacy of the incident extended beyond the airline. Local advocacy groups partnered with the company to promote racial justice and economic inclusion in the broader community. Educational scholarships and mentorship programs were established for young people from underserved backgrounds, reflecting Madison's belief that leadership is about lifting others up. Both women acknowledged the complexity of their journey. Forgiveness was not a simple gesture but a process that demanded ongoing effort. Accountability meant confronting uncomfortable truths repeatedly. Growth required embracing vulnerability and a willingness to change long-held belief. Yet, they also recognized the profound power in these commitments. Ultimately, their experience illustrated how conflict, when approached with empathy and intention, can become a catalyst for transformation. It challenged societal assumptions about justice and power, demonstrating that leadership grounded in compassion can foster healing and progress. The airline's example became a model for other organizations seeking to address systemic inequities through meaningful action. Their story resonated because it was authentic, flawed, messy, but hopeful. It reminded people that beneath headlines and public outrage lie human stories of struggle, resilience, and the possibility of redemption. By choosing to listen and learn rather than punish, both women reshaped not only their own lives but the culture of an entire organization. In the end, the slap that once seemed an act of division became a symbol of unity and change. It sparked conversations that might otherwise never have happened and paved the way for a future where empathy and inclusion are not afterthoughts but foundational values. Through courage, forgiveness, and leadership, Madison and Sherry showed that true power lies in the ability to transform pain into purpose, prejudice into progress, and conflict into connection.